Hello friends, we are back with another beautiful story written by Anton Chekov. Please take a listen. The name of the story is The Kiss. At 8 o'clock on the evening of the 20th of May, all the 6 batteries of the N Reserve Artillery Brigade halted for the night in the village of Mayestakshi on their way to camp. When the general commotion was at its height, while some officers were busily occupied around the guns, while others gathered together in the square near the church enclosure, were listening to the quartermasters, a man in civilian dress, riding a strange horse, came into sight round the church. The little dun-coloured horse, with a good neck and a short tail, came, moving not straight forward but as it were sideways, with a sort of dance step, as though it were being lashed about the legs. When he reached the officers, the man on the horse took off his hat and said, "His Excellency, Lieutenant General von Rabeck, invites the gentleman to drink with him this minute." The horse turned, danced, and retired sideways. The messenger raised his hat once more and in an instant disappeared with his strange horse behind the church. "What the devil does it mean?" grumbled some of the officers, dispersing to their quarters. "One is sleepy, and here this von Rabeck with his tea. We know what tea means." The officer of all the 6 batteries remembered vividly an incident of the previous year when during maneuvers they, together with the officers of a Cossack regiment, were in the same way invited to tea by a count who had an estate in the neighborhood and was a retired army officer. The hospitable and the genial count made much of them, fed them, and gave them drink, refused to let them go to their quarters in the village, and made them stay the night. All that, of course, was very nice. Nothing better could be desired. But the worst of it was, the old army officer was so carried away by the pleasure of the young men's company that till sunrise he was telling the officers anecdotes of his glorious past, taking them over the house, showing them expensive pictures, old engravings, rare guns, reading them autographs, letters from great people, while the weary and exhausted officers looked and listened, longing for their beds and yawning in their sleeves. When at last their host let them go, it was too late for sleep. Might not this von Rabeck be just such another? Whether he were or not, there was no help for it. The officers changed their uniforms, brushed themselves, and went all together in search of the gentleman's house. In the square by the church, they were told they could get to His Excellency's by the lower path, going down behind the church to the river, going along the bank to the garden, and there an avenue would take them to the house, or by the upper way, straight from the church by the road which, half a mile from the village, led right up to His Excellency's granaries. The officers decided to go by the upper way. What von Rabeck is it? They wondered on the way. Surely not the one who was in command of the N Cavalry Division at Plevna? No, that was not von Rabeck, but simply Rab, and no von. What lovely weather! At the first of the granaries, the road divided in two. One branch went straight on and vanished in the evening darkness. The other led to the owner's house on the right. The officers turned to the right and began to speak more softly. On both sides of the road stretched stone granaries with red roofs, heavy and sullen looking, very much like barracks of a district town. Ahead of them gleamed the windows of the manor house. "A good woman, gentlemen," said one of the officers. "Our setter is the foremost of all. No doubt he scents game ahead of us." Lieutenant Lobetko, who was walking in front, a tall and stalwart fellow, though entirely without moustache, he was over 25, yet for some reason there was no sign of hair on his round, well-fed face. Renowned in the brigade for his peculiar faculty for divining the presence of women at a distance, turned round and said, "Yes, there must be women here. I feel that by instinct." On the threshold, the officers were met by von Rabeck himself, a comely-looking man of 60 in civilian dress, shaking hands with his guests. He said that he was very glad and happy to see them, but begged them earnestly for God's sake to excuse him for not asking them to stay the night. Two sisters with their children, some brothers and some neighbors, had come on a visit to him, so that he had not one spare room left. The general shook hands with everyone, made his apologies, and smiled, but it was evident by his face that he was by no means so delighted as their last year's count, and that he had invited the officers simply because, in his opinion, it was a social obligation to do so. And the officers themselves, as they walked up the softly carpeted stairs, as they listened to him, felt that they had been invited to this house simply because it would have been awkward not to invite them. And at the sight of the footmen who hastened to light the lamps in the entrance below and in the anteroom above, they began to feel as though they had brought uneasiness and discomfort into the house with them. In a house in which two sisters and their children, brothers and neighbors were gathered together, probably on account of some family festivity or event, how could the presence of 19 unknown officers possibly be welcome? At the entrance to the drawing room, the officers were met by a tall, graceful old lady with black eyebrows and a long face, very much like the Empress Eugenie. Smiling graciously and majestically, she said she was glad and happy to see her guests and apologized that her husband and she were on this occasion unable to invite Messieurs les officiers to stay the night. From her beautiful, majestic smile, which instantly vanished from her face every time she turned away from her guests, it was evident that she had seen numbers of officers in her day, that she was in no humor for them now, and if she invited them to her house and apologized for not doing more, it was only because her breeding and position in society required it of her. When the officers went into the big dining room, there were about a dozen people, men and ladies, young and old, sitting at tea at the end of the long table. A group of men was dimly visible behind their chairs, wrapped in a haze of cigar smoke, and in the midst of them stood a lanky young man with red whiskers, talking loudly with a lisp in English. Through a door beyond the group could be seen a light room with pale blue furniture. Gentlemen, there are so many of you that it is impossible to introduce you all, said the gentleman in a loud voice, trying to sound very cheerful. Make each other's acquaintance, gentlemen, without any ceremony. The officers, some with very serious and even stern faces, others with forced smiles, and all feeling extremely awkward, somehow made their bows and sat down to tea. The most ill at ease of them all was Rabovich, a little officer in spectacles with sloping shoulders and whiskers like a lynx, while some of his comrades assumed a serious expression, while others were forced to smile. His face, his lynx-like whiskers and spectacles seemed to say, I am the shyest, most modest, and most undistinguished officer in the whole brigade. At first, on going into the room and sitting down to the table, he could not fix his attention on any one face or object. The face, the dresses, the cut glass, decanters of brandy, the steam from the glasses, and the molded cornices, all blended in one general impression that inspired Rabovich alarm and a desire to hide his head. Like a lecturer making his first appearance before the public, he saw everything that was before his eyes, but apparently only had a dim understanding of it. Among physiologists, this condition, when the subject sees but does not understand, is called physical blindness. After a little while, growing accustomed to his surroundings, Rabovich saw clearly and began to observe. As a shy man unused to society, what struck him first was that in which he had always been deficient, namely the extraordinary boldness of his new acquaintances. Von Rabeck, his wife, two elderly ladies, a young lady in a lilac dress, and a young man with the red whiskers, who was, it appeared, a younger son of von Rabeck, very cleverly, as though they had rehearsed it beforehand, took seats between the officers and at once got up a heated discussion in which the visitors could not help taking part. The lilac young lady hotly asserted that the artillery had a much better time than the cavalry and the infantry, while von Rabeck and the elderly ladies maintained the opposite. A brisk interchange of talk followed. Rabbi watched the lilac young lady, who argued so hotly about what was unfamiliar and utterly uninteresting to her, and watched artificial smiles come and go on her face. Von Rabeck and his family skillfully drew the officers into the discussion, and meanwhile kept a sharp lookout over their glasses and mouths to see whether all of them were drinking, whether all had enough sugar, why someone was not eating cakes and not drinking brandy. And the longer Rababovich watched and listened, the more he was attracted by the insincere but splendidly disciplined family. After tea, the officers went into the drawing room. Lieutenant Lobetko instinct had not deceived him. There were a great number of girls and young married ladies.